and welcome to Best Way to Change the World. So we're going to be talking about global topics with local impacts. We're going to be the change makers. So the Best Way to Change is a magazine show focused on global topics with local impacts on everyone living in Forest Row and beyond in East Sussex, and how to practically and psychologically become a change maker ourselves rather than just passive recipients of change. We can be change makers in the structure of families, in the structure of society, in the structure of the climate, and in what we share through creative works. But right now, we're going to be focusing on climate and the environment. So welcome Edouard Hugo, who lives in the wonderful Forest Row, which is the centre of the universe. And we're going to talk about the kind of things that on a local level don't really get discussed that much. So we do have some amazing initiatives locally, cleaning up the rivers and the water, dealing with pesticides, all kinds of great things going on. But the reality of what's heading our way and has already begun to head our way through climate change is something that I think people tend to think of as being sort of over there, something to do with the government. Am I right in saying, Edouard, that it's something that we should be thinking about right now on a local level?
Yes, so there is a say which is think global, act local, and I like that very much. So in order to take the good decisions and the good actions, that is the ones that are going to be that have the most impact for us and the environment, it is very important to understand the context and the amplitude of the challenges that are coming ahead. Some people say this is not a problem that we have. In fact, it's a predicament. So there is no perfect solution. We have to do our best. And also the solution is not unique. It is multiple. There is not just one thing to do. We need to have a diversity of actions and so yes.
Diversity of responses. So just to begin
Mhm.
with, Edouard, what's your sort of background? Why are you interested in this?
Okay. So I'm French. That might be obvious. Since the age of 18 or 20, I've been looking into a movement or school of thought, you could say, called degrowth. My father has been an activist for 25 years, more or less, and him and I, we were exchanging a lot about that. Um, and degrowth basically is about the fact that we cannot have a continuous growth in a finite world. This is like an exponential function, and this always hits the ceiling and leads to crash. So therefore, we need to degrow, and in fact, we will degrow whether we like it or not.
Mm.
So when you realize that, the best is to bend with the wind and accept that. So that is to change the paradigm. So like a dogma, if you like, we have this unconscious belief in our imaginary that things are going to keep going like this. The economy and the monetary system and all of that is based on a growth of, usually we like to have 2% growth per year. This cannot last, and in fact, we're hitting limits. Some of them are energy, and many others. Many symptoms are coming together. So I was interested in these subjects. I did a master in physics in France, so I've got a strong scientific background. After that, I went to do a PhD in astrophysics in Netherlands and Germany. That was 4 years. And during that PhD, in 2007 or 8, I can't remember exactly, I read the IPCC assessment report number 4. So the IPCC, many may know, is the International Panel on Climate Change, which is a group of the best scientists on the questions about climate, and they gather all of their new findings. So every 5 years, usually they're a bit late, it's 6 years, and they try to synthesize and agree on the progress and the new understanding that they have, and they put it in a big document, which is 1,000 pages. But they also have a condensed part for policy makers, which is 50 pages, more or less. So that year I read 1,000 pages. And with my scientific background, so I'm not into climate science, but I could understand a lot of it, most of it. And then I realized, yeah, I can't say the F word, but yes, this I realized the amplitude of the problem that we're heading in, and this was a massive shock for me. I felt anger. I went through a lot of emotions, which I've been dealing with for many years, and I made a lot of progress with it. But then, so I went doing a postdoc after, lecturing also a bit in university, but it was already in me, like I need to change and do something. Obviously, studying the stars is in principle not damaging the world, hurting anybody, but I thought, you know what, they've been there for millions of years, they can wait another millions of years. There's something more urgent to be done here and now on this planet, so how can I use my heart, uh, my brain, my hands, and I found out about straw bale construction. And I thought, well, that might be. I know the building industry and energy consumption in buildings is a very significant part of the problem, and that seems to be a nice solution. Let's go for it. I wanted to find also some balance between my brain, which was a lot of that during the PhD, and using my hands. And I found just that. Oh, I went on a journey, self-made journey for 2 years with my backpack and just getting minimum income in France, which is 300 pounds per month. So I was hitchhiking from site to site, going to self-builders and working with artisans and learning the trade. And kept on going for years, learned carpentry, then moved in UK 10 years ago, Edinburgh 3 years, West Yorkshire, Frome, and now I'm here. I've been here for 2 years. So I'm a carpenter, I'm a straw bale builder. This is what I do for a living. But I've always been interested in these subjects, which are, in French, we call it collapsology. The term appeared in 2015. And in England, you have an equivalent, which is called deep adaptation.
Sorry, say that again.
It's called deep adaptation.
Deep adaptation. So
Yes,
can you say?
initiated by John Bendel.
So how does that work? Like, let's take Forest Row as an East Sussex village as a good example. What does that mean in practice? And I suppose before you explain that, why should anyone in a village like Forest Row be worried about any of this?
Because yes, basically what's going to happen is at a global scale, it's going to be systemic. It's not just it's the ecosystems and us. The whole system is going to change very quickly and massively. And we are going to enter an era of what you call in a complex system chaotic behavior, very high levels of undeterminacy. It will be very difficult to predict the future, but so it's try to look ahead which directions we are heading and what are the problems we're going to face in order, as we said, to take the right decisions.
I mean,
Voilà,
what
so
what
Forest Row will be impacted like the whole of UK and like the whole world.
So I think for a lot of people, they just think, well, suddenly there's some very hot weather and then there's some bad weather. And perhaps what they're not thinking about is that in Kent, which is a key area of the UK for the production of wheat, for example, that that gets massively impacted. So our ability to grow food is affected. It's not just a case of you have to put up with some hot weather and some cold weather. I'm not sure that people are making the connections on a daily basis that of the implications of all of this, because there's the idea, well, if we haven't got enough food here, we just import it. But of course, everyone's going to be having those same problems, aren't they?
Yeah. So indeed, you're bringing the problem of climate change, which is a change in weather patterns and temperatures and rainfalls, which are very important, and what impact this is going to have on the on the ecosystems and also our capacity to grow crops all around the world. And some areas are going to be dry, areas are going to get drier, some wet areas are going to get wetter, and so this is going to affect our capacity to produce food if we're looking at us. from an anthropocentric point of view. There's another factor, and there are many, but there's another factor which is very important. I'm not sure so many people are aware of, but this massive society, globalized world in which we live. So it's very distant, far away countries exchanging goods all over the place. It's very, very connected and very long distance. This is all possible uh, thanks to petrol and fossil
It's
fuels. It's because of petrol and
okay.
fossil fuels that we can do that. And the regarding petrol, it's a finite resource, so it decreases in quantity and also in quality. So that there's what we call the peak oil, and energy is an essential. And this is the physicist that talks. Energy is essential to the survival of this complex civilization. So you could see this as a upper life form, like a collective of humans. Like a human is a collective of organs that collaborate. Organs are a collective of cells. So we call that holons. So there's a higher structure, what we call a dissipative structure, that requires this constant quantity of energy to burn. And so we know other forms, but in fact, when you look at the graphics and the ratios, petrol is essential there, by the way, especially for transport, but other fossil fuels. Voilà. And this is decreasing. So the peak oil for conventional oil has been reached like 5, 7 years ago or so. And now we're trying to scrape less good oil. So this is what I call the cherry tree example. If you have a cherry tree with low cherries, high cherries, good quality cherries and poor ones, and you put a child in front of this tree, where is he going first? He's going to pick the low, beautiful ones. And then what do you do? Well, maybe you go for the low ones, which are not so good, or the high ones, but they're tricky to reach. And we've done the same with petrol. So when we discovered petrol in the States more than a century ago, you would hardly sneeze and it would just go out of the ground. So there was what we call an energy return on energy invested of 100 for 1. You
Wow.
only had to spend 1 barrel in order to extract 100 barrels. And the fields in Middle East also have a they're like just swimming pools under the ground, very easy to access, also very high energy return on energy invested. But these are also starting to. There's still a bit left, but they're they're going to come to an end. And so we're going for lower, so deep sea tar sands. Now we're fracking, etc., which have much lesser EO or I think it's called. So now the world average energy return on energy invested is around, I think, 1 to 15 or 1 to 16.
Wow.
And
So
there's
it's
been
a
studies that
huge
to
difference.
to maintain, and it's decreasing obviously. And in order to maintain such complex societies, there's been a PhD, I think, done by a French student from Paris University. We need a energy return on the energy invested of more or less 10 to 1. If we go below that, we're going to have high difficulties maintain this complex
Well,
society. And so it's this concept of energy return on energy invested came from a biologist. I can't tell his name, probably from the 80s, and it started
so
with,
basically,
let's say.
right now, people are feeling the pinch of high energy costs.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
affecting food, but this is just like a taster, isn't it? So what you're
Hmm.
saying is that the whole system we've got, or let's just take food and the importing of that, it all relies on fossil fuels to get to us. So
Hmm.
although they might be able to keep going for quite a while, the cost is just going to go up and up, and eventually reach a point where it's no longer worth them sending the food here, because
Hmm.
it will cost us so much, so we won't be able to afford to buy it anymore. And we are absolutely not in a position at the moment in the UK to feed ourselves, even on staples, is it? So the whole system of trade and of sending food here and we get food back is going to collapse basically, because because the cost of the fuel. And is there a way to realistically replace fossil fuels in that existing system, or does it rely too much on great big oily tankers and airplanes?
So the short answer is there a way to replace? So replace one for one? I think my short answer is no,
Hmm.
and that's why things are going to change massively.
Hmm.
So just to get an idea of the importance of these fossil fuels and petrols, it's a very short calculation. The, the service that petrol gives us, if we had to do it ourselves, like without petrol and just use our arms and our legs to strength to pedal or to there's small calculations. It's quite fast to get there. In countries like France and UK, for example, because remember there are diversities in the world. We're not all on the same plane in a way. We are using more or less 200 slave, what we call energetic slaves, at all time. So for when you want to take the plane, go to, you take this food, etc. In fact, without realizing, the petrol is giving us the service of 200 slaves
Hmm.
working for us. So even a poor person nowadays in UK is more powerful than the king of England three centuries ago. And that shows in food production because before in the past when we were just farmers and we had no machines or anything like this, I can't tell how many centuries ago, but one person could only feed two people.
Hmm.
You had to work on the land to produce food, and so only 50% of the population, if you like, was farming. And you could only free a few people, so just a few could do maybe some houses, and maybe there was one night and someone that was studying something, but there were a lot of people repairing, forging, all these things. But it was 50% of the population was into food production, and with tractors and petrol and also fertilizers, which are usually petrol-based or gas, uh, and the Green Revolution, what we call the Green Revolution after Second World War. So we started farming with these tractors, and it increased a lot the efficiency, the yield. So when we talk of efficiency and yield, we have to talk with respect to what. So a little bit per hectares, but mostly per hour of work labor. So now, I think in France, it's only 2% of the active population works in food production. So now one person can feed 50 people, and that freed a lot of people from the fields, and they could move into cities and start doing many other things and a lot of useless things, I would say.
But what some
And
people
this is
would
going to change.
But some people would argue that, oh well, they'll use 5G to put a man in an office and he'll run masses of or whole loads of farms, because that's one of the visions, is they don't have to they don't have to go off with a tractor anymore. Everything's going to be mechanized and AI and automated. But ultimately, that still requires the same power, doesn't it? The same power source.
Yes, so you need energy, and we are not going to have that energy, period. There's going to be some form of substitute to a certain extent, but quantity, in mass, as we are using it, no, it's going to drop. So there's been a study done by Pablo Servigne, who is the initiator of collapsology. I didn't read the study, but I know the conclusion, or the Greater Paris around 2050, and there's an estimate that we should have 20% of the population back into food production.
Say that again.
20% of the population should be back into food production by 2050. So
In
this is
in order to
yes.
make sure there's enough food.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But
So
what
it's
kind of
these kind
food
of
production?
shifts that we're talking of.
But what kind of
But
food production?
so well, I mean personally, I'm a big fan of micro farming, where we have and there are examples that work of people who I think with 1 hectare in France, there's a farm. They managed to have a full-time job for two people, and they can produce an amazing. So we are we have much more knowledge than 200 years ago. So we know how to do things. There are ways to do things which are much more respectful of the environment, uh, and that just are simply needs more labor, more people doing, and not just labor and knowledge, and less machines. But we
D-
need more people into food production.
Does this include permaculture and uh, regenerative farming? Are there any?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that. Ouais. And so also generally talking, also because of the complexity of our society is going to decrease, you're going to have what you call simplifications, and in particular, it might be difficult to maintain some form of level of high technology. So we may not realize, but in the computer, in the smartphone, in even to do 5G or all these networks, as an example, you need a massive amounts of metals, minerals, semiconductors. So it's not just energy which is going to lack; it's also resources as minerals. So what we call extractivism, the density of ores are decreasing, which in fact requires more energy, but we've got less. So everything is going to become more scarce, and it's going to be difficult, very difficult to maintain all the production chains of especially those highly complex products that require a lot of different things. So high tech is probably going to suffer a lot. And if you look for resilient strategies, it's probably good to put a lot of eggs into low tech baskets.
Mm.
These are more resilient. So it's interesting because when you look at strategies, there's always a trade-off between efficiency and resilience. And efficiency is how to maximize the output in a given context, in a given environment. And resilience, you don't necessarily maximize the output in this context, in this current environment, but you make sure that you can maintain roughly, or you try to maintain that output when the context, when the environment changes. Whereas when you're efficient, you're very adapted to one condition, but as soon as the conditions change, it crumbles very quickly.
Yeah. So
And so here,
resilience is key rather than just
ah,
looking short. Instead of just looking at the bank balance and how much money we're going to make from doing something over the next few years, it's all going to fold if we don't make sure there's a resilience and adaptability, I guess, is the key, isn't it? So on a sort of let's say take a local level. I mean, I know that up at Tablehurst Farm, the biodynamic farm, but they've been working with regenerative farming techniques and trying to make those work because they can see that the benefits are from a sustainable point of view. That's definitely worth exploring. Are there any other things that we need to be doing based on the fact that we're just so used to going to the co-op and the Tesco and getting our food, and at what point is that likely to change? I mean, it's already changing and it's getting more and more expensive. At what point are people going to really have to go, actually this isn't working, maybe we should be, I don't know, buying our food elsewhere, we should be participating cooperatively in the creation of local food? Most people would think, oh, that sounds nice, but that's not going to happen in my lifetime. So what is the timescales on this, and what are the things that we should be starting to adapt to do, and the skills that we should be learning right now?
mhm. You mentioned time scales, and I think that's an important point. There's been a study called the Limits to Growth from the Meadows report. So from I think the MIT Institute in the end of the 70s. It was beginning of computers, and they ran the first mini complex model. They tried to modelize the world with different parameters: population, food, energy, pollution. I forgot the two others. And they were trying to simulate the system over the years. And every time they were trying to tweak the parameters to try to maintain the system as long as possible, but they just couldn't pull it off. Every time it showed models that were collapsing around 2040 or something like this. And so some collapsologists say that the collapse is a process, and it's happening now, and usually it's kind of discontinuous. So you have falls and then recoveries. You could consider the COVID as one, the wars, etc. And there's going to be more, and at some point you need to understand that there are in complex systems with because of feedback loops, you've got non-linear behaviors, and therefore you hit thresholds and you have triggers that kick in where you shift dramatically into another mode. So that's what also we call the Seneca cliff. He was a Roman philosopher that said once, the rise is slow, but the fall is fast. So in terms of time scales, at the moment, we still have our feet on the ground. We're still standing up, and now is the time to prepare, because when it's going to accelerate, we are going to lose our power to prepare, to act. We're just going to be in a state of falling, if you like, trying to recover. So now is the time to make radical changes. And by radical, I mean radix in Latin. It means root. You have to go to the root, really deep changes. And so in terms of solutions, you were asking for a forest soul. So there are many different things at all levels that can be said. And I don't want to say, as I said, there's not one solution. We need to work on all planes and all levels. The material world, the inner world, the individual scale, the collective scale. So if you look at actions, scales can be yourself, obviously, what do you do in your life? Like, for example, I mean, I can tell, apart from once, but I didn't take the plane for 15 years.
Wow.
Plane is awful. It's awful plane. It's very, very inefficient, especially short haulage. You need to reduce your mileage. Don't heat your house too much. I'm talking of things that have been impacted by local and seasonal. Some people disagree, but there are many studies showing reduce your meat production, your meat consumption, I mean, which then means you can reduce the meat production also.
Or at least eat meat that's sustainably that hasn't been mass produced. So I guess that's the first step, is avoid all the mass produced stuff, because it's going to help your health as well anyway, isn't it?
For the least, yeah, right. So this is what you can do at the personal scale. Then there's the local scale, so forest scale, and there's the governmental scale also you could look at. And I think so the solutions of tomorrow, because the world is going to deglobalize, basically it's going to relocalize, and the solutions are going to be very, very, very local. So it's this thing global, act local, and so the government, I think, should try to open to this vision. Obviously, as I said, the paradigm, it's I think it's going to take a catastrophe, and some people, even with the face in front of it, will still not see it or deny it. At some point, hopefully, things will change at a political scale. So the political dimension at the national level is extremely important. They have to facilitate and ease, change the laws, the perception, etc., to facilitate radically new solutions and things that we never did before, never imagined before. Creativity and imagination is very important. At a local scale, in Foresto, what can we do? Well, yeah, all these little things like increase food production, make more public transportation, help jobs that are useful, and we need to abandon some fields of industries which are not going to be able to survive and are not useful for the time to come ahead. So be proactive into that. I think communicating a lot. So like this show that you're doing is just perfect. Like propagating the idea to prepare people to it takes a bit of time, and also because the emotional aspect, we can talk more about it later, but is also very, very important, because what we're talking of is death. In a way, there's something is going to end. So letting go, change, transformation, and that is usually quite painful. I mean, as an example, with what I know, and I may be wrong again, but on the bad days, I estimate that my daughter has a life expectancy of 40 years, and on the good days, I would say 60 years. But I don't think more than that.
And what will show? How old is your daughter now?
She's 5.
He's 5. So how? so it's not next generation, it's this current generation who are paying the price. And so what are the things that are going to shorten the life expectancy of our children?
Uh, well, food is one. I mean, at the moment, UK is only, I read some statistics, 65% autonomous in winter, 90% in summer. I mean, it's quite well known that UK is very poor in food autonomy. It's a massive net importer. So food is one. I mean, many services are going to crumble. Yves Cochet, a French collapsologue, defines partly the collapse as the end of services supplied by the state. So you can imagine that the NHS will the services where you have a health problem and you can go to the doctor to help you is not going to work so well. Unfortunately, it's such a beautiful service. So yeah, I mean we're seeing already the age expectancy curves are plateauing. Yeah, there's a bit of noise. In fact, I think it started reducing last year in UK, which is the sign of a change of demographics. We are going to live not as long. It's going to be tricky to live so long. And so if you look into the mathematics of demographics, now there's what I see is not these predictions from the UN that we're probably going to reach 9 to 10 billion or something like this, but then there's going to be a big fall, and this is what you find in the limits to growth. So one could say, depending, I mean, the scenarios can go all over the place, depending if we reach plus 3 degrees, or I hardly think it's going to be below that, or plus 5 degrees. We could have 1 billion people left on the planet by 2100, which, so we are talking of potentially of an era of mass dying. And then there's I mean, you can even figure out how many zeros are going to be left on the world population.
I read the other day, I haven't got the exact figures, but the most of the 100 FTSE 100 companies have no plan at all to be more sustainable, and some of them are actually aiming almost for this like 2.5% rise, and it's like nobody's told them yet that this is just too high, and even 1.5 is dodgy enough, and we're only beginning to get the impact of that.
1.5 degree is a study made 50% chance that we hit plus 1.5 degree in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Already. So it's there. It's already.
Yeah. I mean, many have believed that we can't ever stay below that, but it's just desperately trying to stay under 2. But there's not enough people desperately trying. So, but on the ground, even if we do things ourselves, then maybe we'll start to ask more of the companies we invest in and we buy things from, and insist. And I left 3 banks last year because they just weren't doing anything. In fact, they were investing in more fossil fuel extraction. They're doing the opposite. So, but it's only by doing things yourself that I think you then think, oh, actually, you take those next steps to and I believe HSBC Bank have decided that they're not now going to invest in more fossil fuel extraction, and they certainly, that's not because of the government. The government is making it easier, but it's because of people power. So, and it's not just waving placards; it's by customers making their choices. So on the ground, are there some specific things through? Because I want to talk a little bit about support and community, because as you say, there's a grieving process. It's a the more books you read, the more you look into this, the more absolutely terrifying and incomprehensible it is that we're heading for the cliff, and governments don't seem to care even. So it's a very hard thing to get your head around, to get your heart around. But what can we be doing that's proactive on the ground as part of communities in a village like Forest Row that is going to give us more resilience?
So at a collective scale, what is very important is to develop the sense of connection and togetherness to favorize cooperative behaviors. Because we've been in an era of abundance, and um, basically this usually favors individualistic and competitive behaviors. So this is the dominant strategy if you look at it from a game theory point of view. But when you're in periods of scarcity and difficult times, in fact, the winning strategy is cooperation. And in order to, so we need to prepare and develop this sense of love, help, togetherness. So you need to dissolve the ego and try to put the community not higher. I mean, it's very important to take care of yourself. Obviously, all the planes are important, but I think we've lost this sense of community, and it's very important to work on that to get the best responses in times. Because I mean, there may be times where you will see civil disorders and reactions which can be quite strong and not everybody will play cooperatively in this. So that is, I think, a very key. Now, regarding personal emotions, um, there's a similarity, I think, with grief when someone dies, which I don't have much experience of it, but you can go through all sorts of stages. There's this curve of grieving, so you can go through denial, obviously, bargaining, through all sorts of emotion, anger, and I think what's important is to accept these stages and to let it be. It's normal. It's totally normal to go through these stages. There's nothing wrong with someone that is struggling with that. And one great thing is to not stay alone. There, you're not alone. There, it's many people understand that, and therefore it's important to talk about it. And for talking, I mean, so I've been going to a group the last year. I mean, for me, this grieving process and this understanding, I've started it a long time ago. So, and I'm still in it. Sometimes with relapse and so on, but I'm learning to live with it. And so what Joanna Macy calls active hope. Voilà. So I'm by accepting and digesting this grief, you find yourself later into a state where you're not anymore in a reactive state, but a more proactive, if you like, very positive. So I've been for a year in this group locally in Louis, a friend of mine who I worked with, and I found out he was also collapse aware, and he's a bit of a coach, and he wanted to do a group like this. So we gathered monthly sessions, like 2 hours. So he was holding the space, and the topic was mostly about I mean, different things, but very emotional and sharing with others this feeling of not being alone, that it is normal, really helps into.
Yeah, I remember when I first read I think it was this one of the apocalyptic books about what's happening, and just crying a lot and apologizing to my children. I hadn't done anything. I thought I was bonkers, but it is, as you say, it's not just something you do. It's ongoing, and every time you look at the situation, you have to find a way to deal with it. And it's something I think Extinction Rebellion as an organisation have been very strong on, the well-being of and the psychology of dealing with it all, because if you don't grieve, you have to do the grieving, and then you're ready to go, okay, now what can we do? But if you won't do the grieving, you won't do anything. You'll just stay in this state of kind of fear, really. So it's essential to do that, and as you say, to find groups. So of course in Forest Row we've got the Ashdown Forest XR group who meet every month. They can be found on Facebook, Ashdown Forest Extinction Rebellion. And there's these groups and other groups like the one you go to that are all over the country. And I really do urge people to go along to these groups. They're lovely, lovely local people. And they're just trying to get their head around all of this and work out what can be done. And it's not about going and getting arrested. People can do that if they want. But there's many people who do a lot of good work without having to put their careers on the line. Though God bless those who are prepared to do that. Thank goodness, or we wouldn't have had the little changes that we've had already. So, Edouard, what's your your sort of final advice on this? I mean, by the way, I'd love to get you back at some point to talk specifically about housing and regenerative housing and some of your ideas on that. But to round off this discussion, what are the key takeaways that you can give people to be resilient that they can practically do right now? So we've got one, which is find a local group where you can have a safe held space as you process this and start to understand more and accept what's going on, and to stop being delusional about it, because that's not really helping your children. But what else can people do?
Yeah, I'm not going to give solutions like practical solutions. I think it's, as we said, it's very much about growing and change. And obviously, we need practical changes, local, global. I give not more, but a lot of importance to internal change. So to do your own work, and for that it takes courage to look into what is, even if it's unpleasant, and to have, well, not to have no fear, because fears are alright, but in a way to let go and let the process happen within you and within us also. And that's why the communication, having groups and making it a topic that is not a taboo, and making something normal, it's will help a lot in change, because yes. And then from there, and already, I mean, we're all at different stages, etc., but from there more positive actions will certainly arise. That is my takeaway advice is inform yourself, feel about it, take the time, also slowing down, be kind to yourself and to the others, and yeah, go forward.
See, it's not necessarily about rushing into the garden and planting vegetables. It's getting into a space where you can be at peace with what's happening, and then form networks, collaborate, and the answers will be there. There will always be people who've got a really good idea, and what they need is a bunch of other people just to support them, and each community will find its own way.
That's about it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to having you back, if you're okay to do that at some point soon, particularly about to talk about accommodation, basically. This is a big house building and the huge crisis, and then some of the opportunities that there might be there for everyone, which will also help, that are sustainable as well. So thank you so much, Edouard.
Merci, Suzy.
Bye.
See you soon.
Au revoir. So that was a bit scary but lovely, and we do need to make it's a bit like talking about death. It should be just something that everyone can talk about and get the head around and work out what to do, because if we do nothing, we've only got ourselves to blame. And as Edouard said to you, if you've got children, we do have a responsibility to think about the fact that things aren't just going to stay the same. We've had the heyday, as it were, and we need to reconvene and create and change the way we run our world so that it does become sustainable. So see you soon on the next episode of Best Way to Change the World.